Hello and welcome to the first video essay episode. We will be talking about the horror genre, Form and Function by Brigid. Brigid explicitly talks about how it's really hard to classify horror as its own just single entity because there's actually an umbrella which many subgenres fit underneath it. For example, we'll go into the list. There is the Gothic horror, which modernly just came out, Crimson Peak by Guillermo del Toro. Also has a heavy romance feel to that movie. We've got the supernatural slash occult, sort of like ghost and paranormal genre, which is coming out with The Conjuring and the Paranormal Activity series. We have the psychological thriller. We have the psychological horror, which sometimes can be argued that it is thriller, such in the case of Silence of the Lambs. It is horrific what Hannibal Lecter is doing to his victims and what has done, but the main focus is the cat and mouse chase. You can argue that it's a thriller and a psychological horror film. We have the monster movie horror genre, which is stuff like Friday the 13th, also Alien, which also falls under science fiction category. We have slasher films, which are very popular in the 70s. Modernly, and actually one of my favorite films is Behind the Mask, The Rise of Leslie Vernon, which actually is satire and horror. So it also falls under more categories than just horror and horror subgenre. We have body horror subgenre, which recently was released, which is Tusk by Kevin Smith. And I think Jason Mewes actually helped him on that one, which is about this sort of lonely man drifter type turning somebody into a walrus. Also, another one of my favorites is May, which deals with a girl who's sort of taken advantage of and stuff throughout the film, and later she uses pieces of the people who have oppressed her or hurt her to make a new friend. So she actually constructs a friend. One of my favorites at that one. And of course, we have the exploitation film, which can also actually fall into the slasher, which the high amount of nudity in it as well. Modernly would be House of a Thousand Corpses, or probably The Devil's Rejects, which are actually director Rob Zombie's homage to the exploitation genre. And seeing that all these horror movies fall under different categories shows us, well, and me, that horror is always going to exist because it keeps evolving. It goes with the times, such as Alien also falling under monster movie and science fiction. Stuff like May, which is a body horror, but it's also a drama because it's about a woman being exploited, taking literal pieces of her exploiters to make a new friend. So, with all that being said, just as Brigid has said, horror can represent society's anxieties because it is designed to do so. So, such as in the case of May, which I keep going back to, it's something very real that women experience, exploitation and things like that, and it's showing her literally dismembering them to make someone new. And that's kind of a commentary on how women might seek out peace, and people in general, pieces of their actual aggressors and actual friends or lovers. So, horror, I think, is a way for us to tell over honest truths, over exaggerated truths, such as the case of like Crimson Peak with the Gothic romance. We can talk about how love hurts and betrayal literally through murder and deception. It's sort of a hyper over realism is what horror is. Horror is taking our anxieties to the beyond sort of personification. Just as the supernatural and occult films have this overwhelming, invisible presence that is always present, such as us always being afraid of disease and terrorist attack, and even such as racial or gender violence. It's always present. So just as Brigid Cherry said, horror is hard to classify because it's a giant umbrella for many subgenres. But that's because it's a giant umbrella of our sort of pain and anxieties. And we are not one animal. Humans experience that on many layers, and this is how we show it in hyperrealism.